The cardiac monitor in room 309 had been screaming for 40 seconds before anyone moved toward it. Not because the nurses of Rideau Veterans Care Centre were slow, but because the man in that room had already thrown 2 meal trays, a bedpan, and a paperback copy of Gates of Fire at the last 3 people who entered. Hurt. Nurse Pauline Marsh pressed her back against the wall outside the door, her jaw tight, her knuckles white around the chart she was holding. She was 26 years old and had survived her first full year on the veterans ward, which her supervisor liked to say was harder than most people's first decade anywhere else. She had not, however, survived Colonel Warren Holt. "He told me to get out," Pauline said, her voice cracking only slightly. "He said I was a child playing dress-up," he said. "I heard what he said." Sara Kowalski pulled the chart from Pauline's hands without breaking stride. Her voice was flat, not cold, flat. There was a difference, though most people never learned it. She was 31, with dark circles under her eyes that had nothing to do with last night's shift and everything to do with the decade before it. Her hair was the color of winter wheat, pulled back so tight it looked painful. She wore no jewelry. Her ID badge was clipped to the breast pocket of her scrubs, her name printed in plain block letters, S. Kowalski, RN, Ward 3. She scanned the chart without slowing. Her eyes moved to the demographic section first, the way they always did. Not the diagnoses, not the medications, the history. Colonel Warren Holt, retired. Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, 2nd Battalion, Kandahar Province, 2006-2008. Degenerative joint disease, left hip replacement complicated by post-surgical infection, elevated inflammatory markers. Admitted 4 days ago. Refused antibiotics twice. Current temperature 39.1 degrees Celsius. Sarah's eyes stopped moving. Hurt 2nd in 2 PPCLI. She closed the chart with a soft, deliberate snap and handed it back to Pauline without comment. She picked up the medication tray from the cart, the oral antibiotics, the saline flush, the blood pressure cuff, and walked toward room 309. Sara, Dr. Kamran Mehta, appeared from the nursing station, his voice low and urgent. "He's not going to take the medication. I want you to know what you're walking into. He's been awake for 31 hours. He refused the sleep medication, refused the physiotherapist, refused the social worker. He asked me, specifically, to send someone, and I'm quoting, with actual operational experience, or no one at all." "All right," Sara said. "That's not, Sara. He's in significant pain and he's not processing it clearly. He may become aggressive." "I know." Burnt. Mehta looked at her for a moment. In 4 years of working alongside Sara Kowalski, he had never once seen her flinch in a doorway. He'd stopped trying to understand it and started simply being grateful for it. "Call if you need security." "I won't," she said, and pushed open the door to room 309. Room smelled like old sweat and disinfectant and something underneath both of those. A kind of scorched, arid smell that had no business existing in an Ottawa hospital in November. Sara noticed it the way you notice a song from a long time ago, suddenly and completely in the chest first. Burnt. Colonel Warren Holt was 64 years old and built like a man who had never allowed himself the luxury of getting small. He was sitting upright in the hospital bed, with the posture of someone strapped to a board, his arms crossed over his chest, his gray eyes fixed on the middle distance. His jaw was set so hard it looked carved. His left leg, the surgical one, was extended under the sheet. The rest of the room looked like an argument had lost. He did not look at her when she entered. "I said no more nurses," he said. His voice was gravel dragged over concrete. "I said that clearly. I said it to the one before you, and I said it to the one before her." You did, Sara agreed, setting the tray down on the rolling table beside his bed. Then you can turn around and go back out the way you came. I'm going to check your blood pressure first. He turned his head and looked at her then. It was not a casual look. It was the kind of assessment a man gives a situation he has not yet decided is a threat. His eyes moved over her face, her posture, her hands. Stopped. What, 25? 31. You've been a nurse, what, 5 years? 6? 7, Sara said, wrapping the blood pressure cuff around his arm with practiced efficiency. You think 7 years of handing out pills in a building that smells like pine sol qualifies you to tell me what I need? The cuff inflated. Sara watched the gauge. I don't think anything yet, she said. I'm checking your blood pressure. 148/92, Holt said flatly. I've been monitoring it myself. Save the theatrics. She deflated the cuff. He was right. She made a note anyway. Your temperature this morning was 39.1, Colonel. The infection in your hip joint is not responding to the topical protocol. You need the oral antibiotics we've been trying to give you for 2 days. If it spreads to your bloodstream. I know what sepsis is, he said, his voice dropping a full register. It wasn't a shout. It was something quieter and considerably more dangerous. Do not explain sepsis to me like I'm a child. I have watched men die of it in conditions you cannot imagine. I know exactly what it does. I know exactly how long it takes, and I will make that decision for myself in my own time, without a girl half my age hovering over me with a plastic cup. Sara set the medication cup on the tray. I'll come back in an hour, she said. She did not say it as a retreat. She said it the way you announce a fact about the weather, present tense, indifferent to argument. Holt stared at her. Something shifted almost imperceptibly behind his eyes. He had been bracing for the standard script, the pleading, the guilt-tripping, the quietly horrified face. He did not get any of those things. An hour, he repeated. An hour, Sara said and walked out. In the hallway, she let out a breath so controlled it barely moved the air around her. She stood with her back to his door for exactly 4 seconds. Then she walked to the supply room at the end of the hall, went inside, and sat on an overturned supply crate in the dark for 3 minutes. She did not think about Warren Holt's eyes. She thought about 2 PPCLI. She thought about the Arghandab River Valley in August, and the way the light came off the Reg Desert like something alive. She thought about a Nyala armored vehicle, and the smell of burning fuel, and her own hands, shaking in a way they had never shaken before or since, pressing a field dressing against a wound that was taking longer to close than it should. She stood up, turned on the light, and went back to work. When she returned to room 309 at precisely the 1-hour mark, she could hear the change before she opened the door. The monitor was spiking. Not in the emergency register, not yet, but fast, too fast, the rhythm of a man whose body was working harder than his pride was prepared to admit. She pushed the door open. Holt was in the same position, but the effort it was costing him now was visible. The sweat on his forehead had nothing to do with the room temperature. His breathing was shallower. His color was wrong. Still here, Sara said. I gave no order to return, he said, but the gravel in his voice had thinned. It was still iron, but the iron was hot now. You didn't have to. She moved to the side of his bed, picked up the medication cup, and held it out to him. Your temp is going to hit 39.5 within the next 2 hours if you don't take this. Your white cell count this morning was 14.2. The infection is moving. He didn't take the cup, but he didn't throw it either. You people, he said. and there was something in it now that wasn't directed entirely at her. Something that had been building for a long time, looking for any door to exit through. You come in here with your clipboards and your protocols, and you talk to me like I'm a problem to be managed, like I'm malfunctioning equipment that needs adjustment. Do you understand what I did for 31 years? Do you understand what 2 PPCLI left behind in that country? Tell me, Sara said. He blinked. It was not the response he had expected. Tell you, he said it like he was examining the words for structural defects. You said I don't understand. Tell me what I don't understand. Holt looked at her for a long moment, and then, in the way that only happens when a man has been keeping something locked at pressure for too long, it started coming out. Corporal James Alderton, he said. His voice was stripped of everything now except the weight of the name itself. Master Corporal Derek Thiessen. Private First Class Yusuf Ndiaye. He stopped. His jaw worked. Route Foster's. August 14th, 2007. I sent 3 sections down that road on a clearance patrol. I had the intelligence report. I had the aerial imagery. I made the call. He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, he was looking at something that wasn't in the room. The IED was in a culvert. We didn't see it. I didn't see it. Alderton was the first vehicle. He was 22 years old. He was from Lethbridge. He had a daughter he'd never met. Holt's voice did not break. It just went very, very quiet. I wrote that letter. I've written 23 letters in my career, and that one I've never stopped writing. In my head. Every version. Every way it could have been different if I had made a different call. The room was absolutely still. Sara looked at him. The medication cup was still in her hand, forgotten. She set it down on the tray. She walked to the door of the room. Holt straightened, something defensive moving back into his shoulders. If you're calling security, Sara locked the door. Not aggressively. Just turned the small lever with the same matter-of-fact efficiency she did everything else, then turned back to the room. Holt watched her, genuinely uncertain for the first time since he'd been admitted. She walked to the window and tilted the blinds closed. The late afternoon light went gray and soft. She pulled the visitor's chair from the wall and set it beside his bed, not at a bedside manner angle, not angled away, directly opposite him, close, the way people sit when they are about to say something that requires someone to be looked at properly. She sat. She unclipped the ID badge from her scrub pocket and set it on the tray beside the medication cup. She reached up and pulled the elastic from her hair, then pulled it back again, tighter. The automatic, unconscious gesture of someone who does it when they need their hands to stop doing something else. Then she pushed the left sleeve of her scrubs up past her elbow. Holt went still. On the inside of her left forearm, running from just above the wrist toward the elbow, was a tattoo that had been there long enough to have softened at the edges. It was not decorative. It was not the kind of tattoo that belonged on a woman who had spent her career in a hospital corridor. It was a unit insignia, the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry cap badge, rendered in clean black ink with a level of specificity that did not come from the internet. Below it, in plain block lettering, was a designation that removed any ambiguity entirely. PPCLI Kandahar 0608. Holt stared at it. The defensive posture he had worn like a second skeleton dissolved so completely and so suddenly that he looked for a moment like a man who had just put down something extraordinarily heavy. No, he said. It wasn't disbelief. It was the word you say when you need a moment before you can say the right one. I was a medical technician, Sara said. Her voice was different now. Not unprofessional, but no longer clinical. It was the voice of someone who has stopped performing composure and is simply being composed, which is different, attached to your battalion for the second rotation. I was 20 years old when I got there. I was there for Root Foster's. Holt's breath went out of him in a way that was not quite a sound. I was in the second vehicle, Sara continued. When the culvert went, I was 40 meters back. I got to Alderton Inn. She paused. Not for effect. The way you pause when you're counting something real. 4 minutes, which is approximately 4 minutes longer than it needed to be, because the secondary device went off when I was crossing the road and I went down in the ditch. I got back up. I got to him. Her jaw moved once. I was with him. He knew someone was there. That part. He wasn't alone. I want you to know that specifically. The monitor beside Holt's bed was the only sound in the room. It beeped steadily, a little fast. His daughter, Holt said. His voice was barely there. Her name is Brooke. She'd be 17 now. She's 17, Sara said. I know. I've known Alderton's wife since 2009. Claire. She's in Lethbridge still. Brooke plays hockey. She's got his eyes. Holt pressed the back of his hand against his mouth for a moment. He was not a man who wept easily, and he was not weeping now, but it was a near thing, and he seemed to know it. There's something else, Sara said. She leaned forward slightly, her elbows on her knees, her forearms resting parallel, the tattoo still visible, still facing him. I don't know if anyone ever told you about what they found in the culvert. The IED, the trigger mechanism. Past the IED. Sara's voice was careful now, even. The way you carry something fragile. When the engineers swept the area afterward, they found a secondary cache. Not the culvert, 70 meters east. Buried under the road surface at the market intersection, your main element was supposed to reach 40 minutes later. She held his gaze. It wasn't a culvert bomb. It was a diversion. The route you sent Alderton's section down. It was the wrong target. The actual target was the intersection. The intersection where your command element would have been stationary for the marketplace assessment. She paused. The cache at the intersection was assessed as catastrophic. Large enough to have taken out everything within a 60-meter radius. Holt had stopped breathing. The engineer's report was classified at the brigade level for 6 years, Sara said. I saw it because I was involved in the subsequent medical debrief. I've wanted. She stopped, recalibrated. You were never told. No, Holt said. His voice came from somewhere very far down. I was never told. Alderton's section didn't trigger a random device on a clearance patrol, Sara said. They went down that road, and they drew fire, and they absorbed the blast that was designed to lure your convoy to the intersection. Whether they knew it consciously or not, and I believe Alderton did, because he slowed his vehicle before the culvert in a way that wasn't in the patrol order. They prevented your command element from reaching that market square. They prevented a catastrophic ambush. Her voice was steady but not unaffected. It was the steadiness of someone who has rehearsed this moment in the dark for 16 years and is finally, actually in it. James Alderton did not die because of a bad call, Colonel. He died because he was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what he was trained to do, and he did it better than anyone had a right to expect. The silence that followed was immense. Warren Holt, who had commanded men in 3 operational theaters, who had received the Meritorious Service Medal and never once displayed it, who had spent 16 years pressing the weight of a single August morning into a place where he hoped it would eventually stop moving. Warren Holt put his face in his hands. He did not make a sound. He simply held it there, his shoulders curved inward, and breathed. Sara did not move. She did not reach for his arm. She did not say anything. She understood that some silences are the most useful thing a person can offer, and she sat in this one with the same steadiness she had carried into a ditch on Route Foster's in 2007. After a long time, Holt lowered his hands. His eyes were red and dry. He looked at her. "I didn't know your name," he said. "The medic who got to him," I asked. "Nobody could. There was so much confusion with the secondary, the case vac, the—" "Kowalski," Sara said. "Sara Kowalski. I was a corporal then." Something moved across his face, recognition and grief, and something that might, with time, become relief. He looked at the medication cup on the tray. "Hand me that," he said quietly. Sara picked up the cup and placed it in his hand. He swallowed the antibiotics without ceremony. She handed him water. He drank. She made a note in the chart. Neither of them commented on any of it. She replaced the chart on the hook at the end of the bed and stood. She retrieved her badge from the tray and clipped it back to her scrub pocket. She went to the window and reopened the blinds. November light came back into the room, gray and clean. "I'll be back at 1800 to check your vitals," she said. "Kowalski." She turned at the door. Holt was sitting straight in his hospital bed, his hands on his thighs, looking at her with an expression she couldn't have named, but understood completely. "You came back," he said, "to nursing. After all of that, why?" Sara considered the question with the same seriousness she gave the ones that had answers. "Same reason I went to Afghanistan," she said finally. "Someone has to go through the door." She unlatched the lock and walked out. The following 2 weeks transformed Ward 3 in ways that Dr. Mehta would recount to new residents for years afterward as a case study in the profound and underappreciated relationship between psychological safety and physiological recovery. Colonel Holt's infection markers dropped sharply within 72 hours of beginning the antibiotic regimen. His fever cleared by day 4. His physiotherapist, a quietly tenacious man named Garrett, who had twice considered requesting a patient transfer, reported that the colonel was the most disciplined rehabilitation patient he had worked with in 11 years of practice. Holt followed every protocol. He attended every session. He asked specific and informed questions about his recovery trajectory and implemented the answers without complaint. He apologized to Pauline formally, in the hallway, in front of 3 other nurses, in a manner that left Pauline uncertain whether to thank him or salute him, and so she did a small combination of both. He remembered the name of the unit clerk's daughter and asked after her hockey tournament. He was, by any clinical measure, a model patient. His absolute and unconditional trust he reserved for Sara. When Dr. Mehta presented his discharge summary on a Friday morning in late November, Holt listened attentively and then said, "Kowalski already reviewed the outpatient protocol with me. I understand the physiotherapy schedule, the medication taper, and the follow-up timeline. I'll manage." Mehta looked at Sara, who was standing at the foot of the bed, reviewing the chart, her expression professionally neutral. "He's not wrong," she said. "He rarely is, apparently," Mehta said, with the mild exasperation of a physician who has been out-organized by his nursing staff. He signed the discharge papers. "Friday afternoon, Colonel. You're free." Sara was finishing her final charting at the nurse's station when the charge nurse appeared at her elbow and said, in the specific tone that indicated something unusual was occurring in the lobby, "You should probably come down." She found Colonel Warren Holt in the main lobby of Rideau Veterans Care Centre, standing, not in the wheelchair protocol required for discharge, but standing with a cane, in a dark navy blazer and pressed civilian trousers, his his PPCLI veteran pin on his lapel. He was not alone. Behind him, arranged with the informal precision of people who no longer needed to be told how to form up, were 8 men and 2 women. They ranged in age from late 20s to early 60s. Some wore prosthetics. Some had the specific stillness of people who have learned stillness the hard way. One woman was in a wheelchair of her own, her posture so upright it made the chair irrelevant. They wore civilian clothes, most of them, though several had the subtle unit identifiers: a cap badge pinned to a jacket, a regiment patch on a jacket sleeve, of people who have left the uniform but not the identity. Sara stopped in the middle of the lobby. She knew some of them, not all, but some. The woman in the wheelchair had been a signaller. Sara had treated a shrapnel wound to her left forearm at the Kandahar Roll 3 facility in 2007. The tall man to Holt's left, with the prosthetic left hand, had been a section commander in Charlie Company. She had last seen him on a medevac helicopter, unconscious, burnt. Her fingers pressed against the inside of his elbow, counting his pulse against the noise of the rotors. The lobby had the particular kind of quiet that falls when a large space of busy people collectively understands that something significant is happening. Holt took 2 careful steps forward on the cane. "When I was trying to remember the medic from Route Foster's," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the lobby, "I asked 6 different people over 16 years. Nobody had a name. The CaseVac documentation from that day was incomplete. It was one of the things I couldn't resolve, one of the things I carried." He reached into the inside pocket of his blazer and produced a small object. He held it out to her. It was a challenge coin, not a standard issue one. The kind that gets made in small numbers, privately, outside the formal military procurement process, for specific units and specific moments. She could see the 2 PPCLI insignia on one face. On the other, she could see, as she took it in her hand and turned it, a date engraved in small, precise numerals. August 14, 2007. "That coin was made by Charlie Company in 2009, Holt said. "For the people who were on the ground that day, we made 43 of them. I've been giving them to the people I could find for 16 years. I held on to yours because I didn't know who you were." He straightened. "I know now." Sara looked at the coin in her palm. It was warm from his pocket. It weighed almost nothing. It weighed an extraordinary amount. She looked up at the people standing behind him and felt something shift in her chest, not painfully, but with the specific force of something long suspended, finally settling into place. The woman in the wheelchair spoke. "Ridgway," she said by way of introduction. "MCPL Amanda Ridgway. You sewed up my arm." "I remember," Sara said. "Told me it would scar." "It did." "It did," Ridgway agreed and smiled. Holt spoke again. "You told me someone has to go through the door." He glanced briefly at the people behind him, then back to Sara. "We've been trying to find a way to say thank you to the person who came through ours. Turns out she's been here the whole time." Sara closed her fingers around the coin. She had been a corporal in Kandahar at 20 years old, pressing field dressings against wounds in the dark, making the calculations that nobody trains you to make, carrying the weight of them home in the particular way that the people who go through those doors carry things. She had come back to Canada. She had finished her nursing degree at Ottawa U in the rain, working nights at a gas station on Bank Street to cover the tuition shortfall. She had taken the job on the veterans ward because she understood the patients in a specific way that the job description did not account for, and because she believed, without drama, that it mattered. She had not talked about any of it, not as a claim, not as a credential. It was hers, and she had kept it. She stood in the lobby of Rideau Veterans Care Centre on a Friday afternoon in November, holding a coin with a date on it, surrounded by the people who had been there, some of them looking at her with expressions she recognized from the inside. "At ease," she said, and her voice came out rough and steady at the same time, which was exactly right. The lobby was so quiet you could hear the automatic doors at the entrance cycling open and closed for a patient, 2 rooms over, and in that quiet, the veterans of 2 PPCLI brought their heels together and raised their right hands, every one of them, in a salute that had nothing to do with rank. Sara Kowalski stood straight and returned it. Outside, the first snow of November was beginning to come down over Ottawa, soft and unhurried, settling over the Rideau River and the old stone buildings and the quiet streets of a city that had sent its people far away and gotten some of them back, changed, carrying things that don't show on the outside but never fully go away, and sometimes, on a Friday afternoon in a hospital lobby, get to be set down, just a little, in the presence of someone who understands exactly how much they weigh. I keep thinking about the moment Sara walked back into that room the second time. She had every reason not to. Holt had been cruel in the specific way that people are cruel when they're in pain and don't have anywhere else to put it. Not because they're bad, but because the thing they're carrying is bigger than their manners. She knew that. She also knew that his infection was climbing and that nobody else was going to go through that door. So she went. I think about that a lot. Not the dramatic part, not the tattoo, not the classified report, not the veterans standing in the lobby in November. I think about the quiet part. The moment in the supply room where she sat on a crate in the dark for 3 minutes and then stood up and went back to work. That's the part that stays with me, because that's the part nobody sees and nobody applauds. That's just a person decided again to do the right thing when it would have been completely understandable not to. There's something in that I've been trying to understand for a long time. The way that doing the right thing, the genuinely, quietly right thing, almost never announces itself. Sara didn't go back to that room to prove a point. She didn't go back to reveal her tattoo or to deliver the classified truth about Ruth Foster's. She went back because a man was sick and it was her job and she was good at it. Everything else that happened was a consequence of that one unglamorous decision to return. That's how it seems to work in my experience. The things that matter don't usually arrive as grand gestures. They arrive as the accumulation of small, honest choices made by people who have decided, somewhere along the way, to be the kind of person who goes back in. Sara spent 16 years carrying what she'd seen on that road in Kandahar. She carried it not as a trauma she performed for sympathy, but as something she integrated into her work, into her steadiness, into the specific way she knew how Pausen sits with a person in their worst moment without flinching. That kind of knowledge doesn't come free. It costs something real. But it also becomes something real, a kind of understanding that can't be faked and can't be bought, only lived. And Holt, 64 years old, still pressing on a wound that was 16 years deep, because nobody had ever given him the information that would have let it close. What Sara gave him in that room wasn't just a truth about a classified engineer's report. It was the thing people need more than almost anything else. An accurate account of what actually happened, or so they can stop blaming themselves for the version they made up in the absence of one. That matters. Getting the story right matters. Not the comfortable version, not the version that lets everyone off easy. The accurate one, even when it's hard to say and hard to hear. I think about the coin with the date on it. August 14, 2007. Holt had been carrying it for 16 years, waiting to find the person it belonged to. He found her working a ward in Ottawa. She'd been there the whole time. Sometimes that's how it goes. The people who went through the hardest things with you are closer than you think, doing quiet work in ordinary places, waiting for the moment when it's right to say, "I was there too. I remember. You weren't alone." That's worth something. That's worth a lot.